Most people think one thing is true. If you don't care about sports, something must be missing in you. Maybe you're antisocial. Maybe you never bonded with your dad over a game. Maybe you're just different, in a way nobody quite wants to say out loud. Psychology says otherwise. Every Sunday, millions of people sit in front of a screen, invest their emotions into strangers running across a field, and feel genuine joy or genuine despair based on a scoreboard. And then there's another group, just as large, who watch this happen and feel nothing, no pull, no urge to check the score, no emotional stake in who wins. For decades, that second group has been treated like the anomaly. But new research in behavioral psychology, neuroscience, and sociology suggests the opposite. The people who don't obsess over sports aren't missing something. They're running a different psychological program entirely, and once you understand it, it starts to look less like indifference and more like a specific, coherent way of moving through the world. Let's break down what's actually happening in their minds. 1. It's not a missing tribal instinct. It's a higher threshold. Humans are tribal by design. For most of human history, survival depended on knowing exactly who was us and who was them. That instinct didn't disappear just because we're not hunting anymore. It just found new outlets. Sports is one of the most efficient ones ever invented. A jersey color, a city name, a mascot. And suddenly, there's an instant us and an instant them. Here's the part people miss. Not obsessing over sports doesn't mean that tribal wiring is absent. It means the times threshold times for triggering it is higher. People who skip sports fandom aren't incapable of loyalty or belonging. They just don't activate that circuitry for something as arbitrary as geography or team colors. Instead, their sense of us tends to form around things with more perceived substance. Shared ideas, shared taste, shared creative work. A person might feel almost nothing when their hometown team loses a championship, but feel genuinely moved defending a musician, a philosophy, or an online community they've spent years inside. It's the same tribal machinery, just a different price of admission. 2. The brain doesn't care where the dopamine comes from. Sports fandom is, chemically speaking, a roller coaster. Watching your team compete activates the same reward circuitry involved in gambling. Functional brain scans on sports fans have shown activity spikes in reward centers that closely resemble what happens during other high-stakes, uncertain outcomes. And uncertainty is the key ingredient. If you knew your team would win every time, the excitement would evaporate almost instantly. It's precisely because the outcome is unknown that the brain stays hooked. Psychologists call this intermittent reinforcement. The same reward pattern that makes slot machines so effective. You don't get rewarded every time. You get rewarded times unpredictably, and unpredictability is what keeps a brain coming back. So why doesn't this hook everyone equally? Because the brain doesn't generate dopamine from sports specifically, it generates dopamine from unpredictable reward, period. For people who don't obsess over sports, that exact same neurological machinery is simply pointed somewhere else. Some get it from checking the markets. Some get it from a game they're building, a competition in their own field, or a hobby with its own built-in uncertainty. The wiring isn't broken. It's just aimed at a different target, often one that offers a more direct, personal payoff instead of a vicarious one. 3. Mental bandwidth is a limited resource, and they're spending it elsewhere. Following sports at a serious level is not a passive activity. It's a second education. Rosters, stats, trade histories, coaching philosophies, divisional rivalries stretching back decades, all of it has to be tracked, updated, and remembered, often daily. That's a real cognitive investment, and cognitive investment is not unlimited. Every hour spent memorizing a bullpen rotation or an injury report is an hour not spent somewhere else. People who don't obsess over sports have usually consciously or not decided that this particular narrative isn't worth the mental real estate. Not because they're incapable of deep engagement, but because they've already allocated that same capacity towards something they perceive as higher yield, a craft, a body of knowledge, a creative pursuit, a relationship, a business. The mental shelf space that a devoted fan uses for statistics, someone else might be using for chord progressions, or code, or a long-term project that actually has their time's name on it. This is why non-fans often describe sports conversations as exhausting rather than boring. It's not that the information is too simple, it's that maintaining it competes directly with information they've already decided matters more. 4. Mirror neurons explain why watching feels like doing for some people, not others. Here's a strange fact. Watching another person perform an action activates some of the same neurons in your brain as if you were performing that action yourself. These are called mirror neurons, and they're a big part of why sports spectating feels so visceral. When a fan watches a last-second shot, their brain is, in a small but real way, simulating that action alongside the athlete. This is a large part of why sports fandom feels emotionally intense rather than just intellectually interesting. The brain isn't just observing, it's partially participating. But this mirroring effect isn't uniform across everyone, and it isn't fixed to sports. It scales with personal relevance and identification. If you've never played the sport, never lived in that city, and have no personal thread connecting you to the outcome, the mirroring response is far weaker. There's simply less for the brain to project itself onto. People who don't obsess over sports often report the same mirrored intensity just directed towards something they times have a personal thread to. Watching a musician they admire perform. Watching someone execute a skill they themselves are trying to master. Watching a creator solve a problem in a field they care about. The neurological mechanism is identical. The target has just shifted towards something with a closer personal connection. 5. What this actually reveals about them. Put all of this together, and a clearer picture emerges. People who don't obsess over sports aren't operating with less tribal drive, less emotional capacity, less reward-seeking wiring, less neural mirroring. They're running the exact same systems as everyone else. The difference is in time's calibration, what triggers the tribal instinct, what source the dopamine comes from, where the cognitive investment goes, and what the mirror neurons latch onto. That's a meaningful distinction because it reframes the entire conversation. This isn't a deficiency. It's a different configuration, one that tends to prioritize things with a personal, chosen connection over things assigned by geography or convention. And there's something worth sitting with in that. Sports fandom is often inherited a city, a family tradition, a childhood default. The alternative path, the one where someone consciously redirects that same tribal and emotional machinery towards something they chose rather than something they were handed, requires a bit more deliberateness. It's not automatically better, but it is, in a quiet way, more self-authored. So, if you've ever felt like the odd one out during a big game watching everyone else erupt over a play, you don't fully register the stakes of it's not that your wiring is missing a piece. It's that your wiring is pointed at something else, something you actually chose. And there's nothing wrong with that at all.